let's talk about why our childhood still affects us when we're an adult, because this stuff happened a really long time ago, right? So sometimes it can be confusing to kind of see the link. So there are two main reasons why our childhood affects us as adults. The first is that our childhood years are when we are ideally supposed to learn vital life skills. So these are skills like being able to manage stress, being able to navigate relationships in a healthy way, in a functional way. That's when we learn relationships is in childhood. Being able to take care of ourselves, things like that. All of these base skills that get us through life in a way that makes it feel kind of enjoyable and doesn't make it too difficult, essentially. So if we haven't learned those skills during our childhood, maybe we weren't modelled them, maybe we just weren't in an environment that allowed us to develop these skills, then that has a really big knock-on effect in adulthood in terms of our relationships, how we manage stress, how we look after ourselves or don't look after ourselves. The second reason is that when we are before the age of 7, we're in a state that is really similar to hypnosis. So we're taking in everything that we're experiencing, everything that anyone says to us, even though children often seem like people often say children are resilient or they can kind of cope with a lot and it doesn't affect them. Actually, this isn't true. What happens though is that we're just kind of absorbing it and it's all getting stored. So everything that anyone says to us that we might relate to ourselves, so whether that's specific comments people might make about us, our personality, our appearance, how we are to be around, anything like that, anything that's negative gets stored and has a really big impact that stays with us. But also if we're experiencing an environment that doesn't feel completely safe, and by safe I mean not just physically safe, I mean emotionally safe, okay, where we're able to kind of be ourselves, be boundaried, we're able to say no, we're able to kind of flourish in a way that we want to, experiment, be curious with life. If we're not able to do this, then actually it forms tiny moments of trauma. And trauma, I think the word has been, maybe there's a little bit of confusion around the word sometimes, because a trauma doesn't have to be something very specific and obvious that's really awful. Obviously it can be, and some people refer to that as trauma with a big T, but trauma with a little t is just as impactful when you're experiencing it a lot during the years when you're developing. So in childhood, that's when we're developing our sense of self. So if we're in an environment that isn't nurturing enough, or where we're just not getting the emotional input that we need, that leaves us lacking as an adult. That's when we might find ourselves as an adult feeling really low in confidence, having low self-esteem, not really understanding who we are, being confused about kind of our purpose in life. All of this stuff stems from childhood and not having the space or the containment or the support to work these things out when we're younger. Now, the important thing to remember is that when we're children, in fact, from the minute we're born, we are developing strategies to cope with our environment. So we're developing strategies to get our needs met. Okay, that is our main objective. The second that we're born, our first need, first and foremost, is keep me safe and give me milk, keep me fed. And as we get a little bit older, those basic needs stay the same, of course. We need food, we need safety, but then we also add in some other needs, and we add in some emotional needs as well. We add in the need for connection. So we work out and adapt and create strategies to get this from our environment, right? So let's say we have parents, for example, who are not emotionally available. We will adapt and try to find ways to get maybe some connection, maybe some feedback, maybe some a deeper sense of love that we might need. We'll try to figure out ways to do this. That's really good. It's effective. It's an adaptive way to be. It's how we're built. But the reason that all of this matters now is that those coping strategies, those ways that you learned to cope with your family when you were growing up, they stay with us. And that is why we end up creating patterns whereby maybe our close relationship with our partner, for example, starts to mirror our relationship with our father or mother, or we start to develop some friendships that feel similar to our sibling relationships and not in a good way. So all of this stuff that happened a long time ago is really being kept alive within you now through the way you cope with life, through the way you are in relationships, through the way you think about yourself, through the way you feel about yourself. So I'm releasing a brand new course, which is called the Childhood Healing Method, and I've designed it specifically to help you heal and understand and move on from the impact of a difficult childhood, because it does have a long-lasting effect. So the method will help you move away from some of those coping strategies that you developed earlier on in your life, really so that you can move into a more kind of grown, present state, right? So that you can choose now how you want to be in relationships, that it doesn't have to be dictated anymore by those early relationships that you didn't even choose. So I'm a psychotherapist here in the UK, and my main motivation when I first started my training was really obviously I did want to learn how to help people and kind of understand people more, but I really wanted to figure out what on earth had happened in my own childhood. When I trained, I was quite young when I started training, and I was really at a place whereby I was baffled by what had happened in my childhood, and I was just feeling all sorts of the effects, the subconscious programming, all the unconscious stuff was really showing up in my life at the time. So just for a brief bit of context, my mother was and is narcissistic. So what I experienced of that is that there wasn't really space for me to be me as I was growing, as I was developing. She was controlling in the way that she mothered me, and there was a lot of unpredictability. So I didn't know from one day to the next whether I would get her being positive and kind of love bombing, and sometimes she would be kind of really, really over the top and smothering, or sometimes really angry. So all of that, obviously had an impact on how I started relating to people. And my father he was very passive, so I would describe him as kind of physically present but not emotionally present. So there wasn't really that kind of connection. There certainly wasn't enough in that relationship to buffer my experience with my mum. So all of this created coping strategies in me, things like people pleasing, things like, because people pleasing is about adapting, right? I learned to adapt to my parents so that I would get enough of what I needed, enough love, enough attention, enough connection, something authentic, which is what all children are kind of looking for. So it created also my pattern early on, which I don't have now, but my early pattern of being kind of comfortable around passive men, being comfortable around men who are very submissive and not really present. So let's fast forward about 15 years, and now, I've gone through such an extensive process of learning about myself, becoming aware of these kind of coping strategies that I'm mentioning. Obviously, there were lots more, but I've just given you a little bit of a sense there. Self-reflection is now a daily part of my life. It doesn't feel like a big deal. It's just kind of part of how I operate in the world. I've learned tools to be able to manage my feelings. My mother was also very stressed a lot of the time. There's a high level of stress in my childhood environment. So I understandably then couldn't really manage stress very well myself. I found it familiar, maybe even comfortable for a while, but I certainly couldn't cope with it very well. But now I've learned all sorts of tools to be able to manage stress in a different way and be able to create healthy relationships, be able to now spot codependent relationships, which before I was maybe quite drawn to relationships and people who were quite draining of me, who wanted a lot from me, who wanted me to help them, to fix them, to rescue them. And I can now really spot those relationships, and I just kind of sidestep, and I just move away either from those relationships or from those parts of the relationships. That I've created a way to be much more aware and in charge of my own dynamics that I have with people. And all of this has really just helped to create a life that feels a lot more purposeful, enjoyable, fun, meaningful. So through all of my personal experiences, and also obviously through my psychotherapy training as well, I've developed lots of techniques which I've used myself, and I've helped my clients to take on board as well, to help you kind of move past the childhood stuff, right? Because I really am bothered by the idea that a difficult childhood has to mean that life long term is difficult. And I know that that can be the case, but for me, it doesn't have to be the case. There are ways that we can make sense of what happened and move forward, right? Now, one of the reasons that I'm really devoted to this work and that I'm specifically creating this course on this topic is because a difficult childhood, or childhood where you don't quite get enough of what you need, typically erases or erodes, it kind of really wears down our self-esteem, our sense of who we are. So I just want to show you something quickly, because this, it can be quite effective way to, I suppose for me, what I'm about to demonstrate is, once we get this concept, then it's a really great foundation for doing all of this type of work that I run through and help you with in the course. So this is a £20 note, 20 British pounds. So, okay, this is worth £20, right? Okay, so I'm going to scrunch it up. I'm going to, you can't see here, but I'm kind of bashing it. Okay, I'm going to kind of throw it around a bit. Okay, scrunch, scrunch. How much is that worth now? The same amount. No matter what has happened to us, no matter how much we feel or have been scrunched up and emotionally thrown around and stamped on, we're worth the same amount. You're worth the same amount. And if you can kind of hold that and take that in, I hope that will go some way towards kind of helping you understand the basis of why I put this course together. Because so often we get confused, right? And we think all of that stuff that happened, all of those things that were said or done or not said or not done that I needed, all of that somehow means that I'm worth less. I'm worth less than I was. It means there's something wrong with me, something bad about me. But it's not true. You're worth exactly the same no matter what you've experienced. And that, as I said before, that forms the basis of this work. And then, there's so much we cover in this course. There's so much we can do to help you kind of move past the impact of all of those things, so that you believe, we can know something, but believing it and embodying it and moving through the world feeling it is different. And that's really what I want to help you do, is help you to move through the world knowing, being in touch with your worth. So when we don't feel safe, or if we feel misunderstood or excluded in some way when we're younger, it does really have an effect on our brain, okay? And it does create moments of trauma, whether with a capital T or a small t. It creates these moments of trauma, and what that does is it does change our brain. Okay, it changes how our brain forms. It creates a brain that is mistrustful. It creates a brain that puts up blocks in relationships to stay safe, that maybe shuts down, goes into depressive modes as a way of preserving yourself. But the good news is that our brain regenerates all the time, just like the rest of our body. If we get a cut on our arm, after a while it heals, right? The skin regenerates, the cells regenerate. All of our body is doing this all of the time, and our brain is the same. We just need to start feeding it with different information, different ideas, a different environment, different connections, and that is how we start healing. So I would help you with all of this in the childhood healing method, and it starts off, the method that's in 4 parts. It starts off with understanding your childhood and accepting it, because accepting something means that we become free of it, okay? We don't find ourselves so preoccupied, or it's just not going to keep coming back so much. And that first section will really help you link what happened then and what's happening now, what life is like now for you. Then we move on to helping you heal those old wounds. So there's some lovely inner child work, there's inner teenager work. I think often we overlook our teenage years are so fragile, they're so precious, they're so impressionable, but also notoriously difficult. So if we've had parents who maybe struggled with the basics of parenting, perhaps, or emotional parenting, then it's likely that the teenage years were tricky. So there's some great healing work there. Then the third part of the method is me teaching you how to have healthy relationships, because a difficult childhood means that relationships feel hard, they feel confusing. But there are so many ways to decode relationships, to understand them, to make sense of them, to just kind of arm yourself. I want you to have access to the information that I had in my training without the jargon, okay, without all of the stuff that's a bit mind-boggling. I've just distilled it down so that you have a way to make sense of, those difficult relationships, those ones where you're like, what is going on here? I don't get why that person's reacting to me like this. I don't get why this is so hard. I don't get why when I try to talk to my sister about such and such, it gets such a bad reaction, but yet I can talk to my friends about the same thing. What is happening here? So that third section talks you through all of that. Then in the final part of the method, we focus on reclaiming yourself. So this is the kind of nuts and bolts of reconnecting to who you are, figuring out who you are, figuring out how to parent yourself, figuring out what you want from life, what you can do, what lights you up, what fulfills you, how to be compassionate with yourself so that you're not beating yourself up and just kind of repeating those patterns maybe of your early relationships. If we're not being compassionate with ourselves, we're often just repeating what we experienced early on that wasn't good, right? Figuring out your values, all of that kind of good stuff. So all the stuff that potentially you weren't able to do as a child, because if we're in a state of where we're trying to navigate an environment, we're having to adapt lots, we're having to create lots of different strategies, then we don't have the resources, we don't have the energy to figure all of that stuff out about who we are. So the method is designed to be done alongside your life. Okay, this is not something, I don't believe in having to put everything on hold to heal and to feel better. For me, that doesn't make any sense. This is life. Healing is life. It's not something that you do and then you start life, right? We do it, we integrate it, we do it alongside. So that is why the childhood healing method is going to be all pre-recorded. There is no time limit on it. You get lifetime access to it, but you can do it at your own pace. So that is where the integration piece comes in, whereby there might be bits that you whiz through and there might be other bits that you just do a tiny chunk and you pause and you take it in and you stop and you think and you put the exercises into practice and you make the method part of your daily life. So in the next video, I'm going to talk you through in a lot more detail some really great ways to approach your relationships that will be different, that will help you. I talked earlier about this idea of kind of decoding relationships, right? That there's ways that we can really make sense of what is happening in our relationships and why, and what we're doing, what the other person's doing, how we can get to grips with it so that relationships become less baffling, they become less draining, they become less distressing. Because suffering can be part of relationships, but it really shouldn't be the main part. The only part of relationships that might involve suffering are bits that we can then use for growth, right? Otherwise, what's the point? What are we doing here? These relationships need to be supportive. We need to be creating networks that are supportive of us. So I'm going to teach you in the next video how to do that. So don't miss out. That will be in a few days. Thank you for listening and take care.